Kingdom Come: Deliverance 2 really did get 2 Gaming Awards nominations. One for the game, and one for Sir Hans Capon as Best LGBTQ Character. Daniel Vávra really did publicly say he was proud of that recognition, while also arguing that Henry and Hans' romance should not be treated as woke in the usual online sense. The romance route really is optional. Warhorse executive producer Martin Kleimer really did say the backlash mostly came from what he called a handful of terminally online culture warriors, and probably did not affect the game's reception. The game also really does ask a lot from PCs, with recommended specs including 32 GB of RAM, and an RTX 4070 or Radeon RX 7800 XT. Now let me walk it through like a breakdown instead of a seance. First thing, the nomination page matters, because it turns the whole fight from rumor into paperwork. The official Gaming Awards nominee list for 2026 includes Kingdom Come: Deliverance 2 in Fan Favorite, and Sir Hans Capon in Best LGBTQ Character. Good, put that on screen, sit there for a second. Read it like a grown man, because the worst version of this story starts with 10 gallons of outrage, and only later remembers there was an actual source page the whole time. No, start with the page, show the categories, show the names. Tell the viewer this happened in public, and in writing. That already clears half the smoke. Then you move to Vavra, because that is where the contradiction becomes visible instead of implied. Games Radar reported that he said he was really proud of the nominations. Same coverage, same topic, and he is also arguing that the Henry and Hans romance is not woke like other examples people keep throwing around in role-playing game arguments. Stop there, that pairing matters. Proud of the nomination, resistant to the label, happy to take the applause. Not interested in wearing the costume many people think comes with it. You do not need a metaphor factory when the contradiction is already standing on the table in boots. Now, before somebody starts howling that the game forced this on everyone, slow down and read the mechanic. The romance path is optional, walkthroughs and guide coverage make that clear. The Henry and Hans scene depends on player dialogue choices, including heart-marked selections at specific moments. That does not tell you whether the writing choice was good. That does not tell you whether the option was cynical. That does not tell you whether it fits your reading of Hans. What it does tell you is that forced romance is a sloppy description. If the player has to keep selecting the rot himself, criticize the thing that exists, not a louder version you invented, because it hits harder in a thumbnail. Actually, this is where the whole story gets more interesting, because the backlash is not only about one optional scene. Hans is not a random stranger from side content. He is a known character in a franchise already carrying old arguments about historical authenticity, representation, and what kind of audience Warhorse is supposed to be serving. So, when this romance option landed, people did not react to it in isolation. They reacted through that old baggage. One side sees a normal choice that can be ignored. Another side sees a familiar character being repackaged for attention or approval. Those are different arguments, and too many videos flatten them into one screaming pile. Next receipt, the producer quote, because this is another place where people paraphrase until the meaning turns to mush. PC Gamer reported Martin Kleimer saying that attacks over gay romance and representation only mattered to a handful of terminally online culture warriors, and probably did not affect the game's reception. That is the line, use it, show it. Read it without adding clown makeup. He is not saying nobody got angry. He is saying the anger came from a narrow online slice, and did not amount to much in business terms. You can call that dismissive, you can call it accurate, you can call it both. But a real breakdown should let the viewer see the sentence before the narrator starts shadowboxing the sentence's ghost. Then comes the sales context, and this part matters because outrage coverage loves to imply market collapse without doing the boring check afterward. PC Gamer reported that the sequel hit 5 million copies within its first year. That does not prove every critic was wrong, and it does not prove every design choice was wise. It proves something narrower and still useful. Online anger and commercial disaster are not the same event. If a game is moving that many copies while the discourse is foaming, then any honest breakdown has to hold both truths at once. The backlash was real. The market did not treat it like a fatal wound. That distinction matters, because drama channels keep inflating heat into body count. Now pivot to the hardware side, because this is where the ordinary player enters the room carrying a wallet instead of a manifesto. The Steam page lists recommended specs that include 32 GB of RAM, an RTX 4070 or Radeon RX 7800 XT, 100 GB of storage and an SSD. That is official storefront information, not rumor, not comments. Not somebody's cousin claiming the optimization killed his dog. It is the product page telling buyers what kind of machine the game expects. So yes, the hardware complaint has clean factual backing. While one crowd is trying to turn medieval flirting into a referendum on civilization, another crowd is looking at the requirements page and wondering whether the game also wants a blood sample and a rent check. And that matters more than people admit, because average players do not always care about the same emergency the internet cares about. For a lot of buyers, the main question is not ideological, it is practical. Will this run on the machine I already own? Am I about to pay full price for a game and then discover I also need a new GPU to make the horse behave? When a story contains both culture war bait and expensive hardware demands, one side of the story becomes a giant magnet for attention, even though the other side may hit more people where it hurts. That is why good sequencing matters. Show the real headaches too. Now add Musa of Mali, because this is another place where people stop describing and start sorting tribes. Musa became part of the sequel's broader discussion around representation and historical plausibility. That is the clean version. He entered a franchise already carrying older arguments about diversity and authenticity. Because of that, discussion around him became symbolic almost immediately. He stopped being just a character in a story and started functioning like evidence in a bigger ideological case. One side reads him as proof the studio changed. Another side reads the backlash as proof part of the audience cannot handle anything outside its preferred script. Either way, the conversation gets dragged away from writing and into faction uniforms again. Then there is Vavra stepping away from active game development leadership to focus on a film or television adaptation and wider transmedia work around the series. Games Radar reported that shift last month. Do you need a conspiracy board to mention that? No, the reporting is already enough. Public controversy, public pride in the nominations, public insistence that the romance is not the bad kind of progressive thing. Public move toward the adaptation side of the brand. You do not have to scream mastermind. You just have to acknowledge that cynical viewers are not hallucinating when they look at that sequence and say the timing feels convenient. Convenient timing is not proof of manipulation, it is still part of the texture. And this is exactly why YouTube coverage keeps failing the audience. Search this topic, and what do you find? Betrayal framing, truth framing, clip farming, outrage bait. Defense threads wearing thumbnails, everybody trying to win a tribe before they line up the public facts in order. That is why viewers stop trusting breakdown videos. They click for a case file and get a sermon. They click for sequence and get mood. They click for receipts and get a narrator treating the internet like a haunted house ride. By the time the source page appears, if it appears at all, the performance has already told the viewer what to think. So here is the stricter conclusion, me to you, no decorative fog. The nominations are real, Vavra's proud reaction is real, his effort to separate that reaction from the usual woke framing is real. The romance is optional, Koima's dismissal of the backlash is real, the sales strength is real. The recommended specs are real. Musa became symbolic because older authenticity arguments were already attached to the franchise. Vavra's shift toward adaptation work is real. None of those facts automatically prove motive. None of them automatically erase criticism either. Facts tell you what happened. Interpretation tells you what people think it means. If a script keeps those levels separate, the viewer leaves informed, instead of merely entertained. Now the rant and this part can stay short, because the evidence already did the lifting. The rotten trick in this ecosystem is that everybody gets rewarded when the disagreement is described badly. Outrage channels profit if optional becomes forced. Defenders profit if every critic becomes a cartoon bigot. Studios benefit when all backlash turns into weather. Aggregators benefit when one quote becomes 3 days of civil war. The audience gets left with content that keeps announcing how absurd the discourse is, without calmly showing the evidence that made the discourse possible. That is why people stop trusting analysis. Too many creators are selling a feeling with a source tucked under the counter. So, if the title promises a breakdown, The order has to stay hard and simple. Answer the question early, show the nomination page, read Vavra's quote, explain the optional trigger. Read Climber's line, give the sales context, show the specs. Mention the older authenticity baggage around Musa. Mention the adaptation shift, then argue, then mock, then get angry. But do not reverse that order and call the result a breakdown. Because once the smoke machine starts before the paperwork, you are not informing the viewer anymore. You are dressing up a hunch and hoping the lights are low enough that nobody notices. That is the standard. Keep the pace aggressive, keep the pressure high, but keep the facts visible enough that the viewer can follow the road beneath the tires, instead of hearing another engine screaming into dark.